Hi there, it's Lindsay Upton the Quilt Quine, and we're going to be looking at the mask feature in Q-matic. So I've loaded a practice piece of fabric on my frame. I've put in the size of the practice quilt. I've cleaned and oiled the machine, obviously, and put in a new bobbin and a new needle, so we should be ready to go. Instead of a patchwork quilt, I've just got a piece of calico or muslin, and I did iron it, but it actually looks rather crumpled, so you'll just have to ignore that. Unusually, I have decided to baste the entire quilt to give it stability. Normally, I wouldn't bother to baste the quilt on an everyday edge-to-edge quilt design, but because I'm going to be cutting out a part of the design and avoiding it, and therefore having big unquilted areas, I thought it would need some stability, otherwise the whole thing might go wonky. So I have run lines of large basting stitches every 4 inches all the way down the quilt, so it shouldn't wriggle around too much. The mask feature in Q-matic is used when you want to avoid stitching on part of your quilt. Perhaps there's a large applique or a special block or a panel in the middle of your quilt. So we're going to look at how you can set that up. So here is the full view of my practice quilt. It's something like 45 inches across and 40 inches down. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose an all over quilt panto or edge to edge and lay it down on my quilt, not thinking about any areas that I want to mask out. So my advice to you is to try and choose a fairly basic all over pattern. You'll see why. So we're going for this one, which is called malachite. So here it is. It's a fairly generous pattern, especially on a small quilt, but it'll work quite well for our purposes. So let's just set it up as an all-over design on this small quilt. So I've placed enough patterns and moved them in close to each other so that I can cover my entire quilt. At the moment, it's all connected as one pattern, but I will need to disconnect it so that I can do a row at a time. So the first thing to do is going to be to cut the extra bits of pattern off the sides and off the top. So I'll do that. Okay, so the top row of the all over quilt design has been trimmed, but what you can't see is that there is actually a panel marked in here. I marked it with a disappearing pen. So I'm going to have to show the Q-matic where not to stitch. Now, the way that I like to set up a masked area is to actually place some markers. So I'm going to the pin head. I'm just going to go around this is the panel, pretend panel, and I'm going to place some markers until I get a closed shape. This is not the only way of doing it. I like to do it. I can see the markers on the screen quite clearly. I have to make closed shape for this to work. Then on the screen, I can join them up. So now I have a clearly defined area where Q-matic is not allowed to go. I want to stitch most of this top row, but not go into this area here, because this is part of a large central panel that I want to avoid sewing over. So I'm going to go into the mask icon, and I'm going to be using the screen, of course, on this selected design. And if I click the little blue line that has been drawn, it goes black, and I want to chop out everything that's happening in here. So I'm going to preview this. And it has cut out that top section. And it hasn't done anything with the second row, which is great because I'll deal with the second row when I come to it. So I'm perfectly happy with this. So I'm going to get the Q-matic ready to sew this top row and avoiding this section. Now, the thing is, you'll have far better success with mask if your background design is simple And your shape is simple, because what it's going to do is lots of starts and stops at all of these points. So what we really need to go and do is go into settings, and I like to turn off the pause to pull bobbin off feature. So every time it comes to a stop and start, it simply carries on. Now you need to be close by just to keep an eye on all of those jump stitches. And now I'm ready to sew this first section. I want it to go to the start point. Okay, so Q-matic has now stitched out the top row and avoided that part of the central panel that I didn't want it to sew over. There were remarkably few stop starts, in fact. There are a few jump stitches, but I'm just going to leave those in place until later. There are a couple of different ways you can deal with them, so I'll tell you about those. Ready to do the next row. I'm going to need to roll the quilt to the next section and realign the safe area so that the Q-matic knows where to place the next bit of pattern. Once I've done that, I will mask out another section of that panel. After I have realigned the quilt to do the next section of the pattern, I'm going to need to trim off the sides. So that's my next thing to do. So the next section of the pattern has been placed, but what I'm going to do next is remove these markers. So I'll go back into markers and clear them. I'm going to set up some more markers. If every now and again I can look over at my screen and check that I am actually plotting out what looks like the right kind of outline for the shape that I want to cut out of the stitching. So I have a large rectangle here, which corresponds with the so-called panel on my quilt, my practice quilt. So I'm just going to join these up. I've joined them up to get a closed shape. Now I need to go into mask, and I'm going to use the screen on this selected design. I want it to cut out what's on the inside, and when I click on the line, it goes black, green check, and it has cut out the section that I do not want to be stitched. You should be able to see that this time there are going to be more stops and starts, which we just need to keep an eye on. So this is the bit that we're going to do next. Once again, the machine has stitched out the middle section of my quilt and avoided the large area in the middle, which might be a special applique or a panel. So now I'm ready to move on and do the last row. So now I have moved my quilt on and repositioned the Q-matic so that it knows where to put the next row, and I've trimmed off the edges and I've got rid of the old markers. So what I'm going to do now is put in some more markers so that I can tell Q-matic which area to avoid down here. So if I want, I can use a pen to mark on my quilt if I'm not completely sure. All I have to do is make a closed rectangle down there. If I glance over at my screen, I can see that I've got enough points to join them up and make a rectangle, so I'll just do that. What you might notice is that this looks quite wonky, which is perfectly because obviously the rectangle that I drew on my quilt wasn't terribly accurate, but that may well happen on a patchwork quite easily. I have to select my pattern before I go into mask, and I'll just check that we'll be using the screen on the selected design. We'll be removing the stitching that's going on the inside. If I click the blue rectangle, it goes black, and it has taken out that section, which is the bottom part of the panel that I want to avoid sewing on. There's going to be a few stops and starts, as you can see. So you just have to keep an eye on the jump stitches. Let's press play. And there we are. The whole project is complete. I've got edge-to-edge quilting all the way around my quilt and a blank space in the middle where I might have something fancy that I don't want to stitch over. So you might be wondering what we do about all of those jump stitches. So now I will tell you that there are a couple of different options. You could add some more markers to plot out lines and just stitch a little bit of a line at a time using the Q-matic. Or my preferred method would be to attach the ruler base and get out a long arm ruler and simply go around and connect them. Alternatively, if you don't want to do either of those things, you could, when you have finished your quilt, take it to your domestic machine and stitch round it. Maybe you could even add some couching or some fancy stitches, just in case the edge of your masked area is a little wobbly. If I want to get the Q-matic to stitch the edge of my masked off area, I would have to place several very accurate markers, including those that sit right on top of all these little stitching end and start points. As you can see, I have placed quite a lot of markers right along all the stitching stops and starts. I can't possibly see this accurately to join them up, so I'll need to go into actual size view. Then I can join them together by connecting each one in turn. You might be able to see that even though I've tried to be very accurate, some of the stitch lines don't quite line up with my markers. In this actual size view, you'll be able to see that not every single marker is right on top of a stitch line, even though I tried to be very accurate, which is why my own preference would be to go around the outside of my masked area using a long arm ruler, because then I can just nip from point to point and just make little adjustments if I need to. So now we have a blue line, which is lined up with the very bottom end of my masked off panel. If you now press play, it goes green. You can ask Q-matic to go to the start point, which is over there, and it should stitch a straight-ish line along the masked area. Q-matic has done a very good job of trying to draw a straight line despite my wonkily placed markers. I can roll the quilt back and do the same at the top end, but I'll probably have to come down the sides in a couple of sections because it will be outside of the safe area. You might want to use the mask function in a block. So I have drawn a 12-inch block on my practice fabric with markers in each of the corners. And as you can see, it's quite a wonky block, but never mind. I have drawn a heart inside my block, which could well be an applique heart in a real quilt. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to place lots of markers around my drawing every ½ inch or so. And remember that it won't do a lovely curve around my heart. It will be a lot of little short straight lines. Now you can see a heart shape on screen. I was moving the sew head only tiny amounts vertically and horizontally because I didn't want to risk the belts coming undone. So you're going to have to join those up, but you will need to be in actual sized view. So now we can see them. I'm going to connect them together. So all the markers have been joined together with short, straight lines. It's not curved. Now, obviously, I don't want to stitch out a slightly jagged shape, so I'm going to go and select a heart from the design pool and see if I can get it to almost match my applique heart. First of all, I'm going to measure how wide and how long my heart is with my tape measure. I've just measured my heart and I've made a note in my notebook of how wide it is and how long it is. So I've been and looked for this heart. So I'm just going to put it randomly on the screen. And it's red at the moment, which means I can do things, and I would like to resize it. Now, I do not want to maintain the ratio. I don't necessarily want it to be absolutely bang on the same size as my heart, because when it stitches out, some of it might stitch onto the fabric of the heart and some of it might be slightly out. So I shall just try and go for the tiniest bit extra. So the width of my heart is 4 3/4 inches. So I might just want to make it 1/8 of an inch larger. So 4 3/4 plus 1/8 of an inch. How about that? So I'll say okay. And then height-wise, my heart measures 5 inches. So I'll make it 5 inches plus 1/8, which is 5.125. Okay, and apply. So there is a nice smooth heart, which is going to be just a tiny bit bigger than my jagged one. I'm going to grab the red heart and put it on top of my one. If I go back into the actual sized view, I can get it into position. Now you will be able to see that it is a fair bit bigger than the heart that I drew. So if I want to just fiddle about with the size a bit more, I can. I can either use the keypad or I can use these little toggles. After a little jiggery pokery, you should be able to get the new heart shape to fit quite closely around your original heart. I have to say that I would use this for the mask, but then I could take my quilting ruler, maybe an arc, and I could go round stitch in the ditch. Personal preference. Now, the thing I really do not want to have sewn is this jagged line. So I'm going to click it so it goes red, and I'm going to remove it. So the stitch line is now the smooth heart. Perhaps we'll get rid of these markers as well. So I'm going to select a block to place in this square, and this is the one we're going to go for. It's an Amanda Murphy Hearts block. So it's just there at the moment in the middle of the screen, but I want it to go into this square. So it's red at the moment, which means I can do things to it. So I shall go into boundary so that I can get it to go right into the corners of my slightly off block. I can either use the screen or, for greater accuracy, I think I shall use the sew head. I'm going to morph it to fit. If I want, I can give a tiny margin. It doesn't have to go right into the corners, but I do want it to go right into the corners on this occasion. So I need to go over to my sew head and click the 4 corners so that that red block goes and sits right in there. I now click green. Hopefully it fits right into my square. At the moment, I've got the pattern going in the square and right over the heart. Now I need to go into mask. I'm going to use screen, selected design, inside, and I also want to sew the mask outline, the heart. So I'm going to select screen, selected design, inside. I want to sew the mask outline. I click the heart, which goes black, and I tick yes. It's not going to stitch in the heart, but it is going to stitch everything else around the block. But I don't want it to stitch the outside of the block, so I'm just going to put that in the bin. There we are. So this is ready to stitch. So I've turned off the bobbin stop feature. I'll just press play and it'll take itself to the start point. Now my block with its heart-shaped cutout has been sewn, and it is pretty accurate, I have to say. My advice would be to try and stick to a fairly simple background block pattern and a simple shape, because obviously if it's a circle or a square, it's not going to be as difficult to match up as it was for a heart. That is, in essence, how I would use mask with Q-matic. There are other more complicated features in Art and Stitch, but I don't think I need to use them for the majority of the time. However, I did have a little exploration when I wondered where I could get other background fills from. So if you'd like to see that little bonus section, we will go and look for some interesting background fills in Art and Stitch. Okay, here we are in Art and Stitch. We're on a 50% view. I'm going to put down a rectangle. Okay, I have drawn a 12 by 12 inch square. So what I want to do now is put a creative fill inside this square so that I can export it into Q-matic. I'm going to go into the library, which is this star icon, and what you see is creative fills. Now, there are some lovely ones, but the ones that work nicely are green because they're supposed to be continuous. I did have a go with some of the others, but it looked like they were going to have 100 million starts and stops. They're a bit small to see. Right, here's a nice one. It's looks like jigsaw puzzle pieces. Right, I have to select the whole thing. Then I have to assign stitches. Then I'm going to send it to Q-matic. I will give it a quick little name, puzzle fill. It says it doesn't fit into the hoop, but that's fine. There it is. So that's really quite fun. If I like that design, I can go to File, Save the design file. I'm just going to give it exactly the same name again, which was Puzzle Fill. Save. I might want to use that a different day, so I'm going to just put it into the bin. If I want that puzzle design to be within my design pool, my design library, I'm going to have to import it. Now I have to go and hunt for where it went. So I have to scroll down and try and remember where things get saved when I've been in Art and Stitch. And for me, they're in designs under this desktop here. There's all sorts of things here that I have imported on other occasions. And there's the puzzle fill. So I'm just going to select all. And there it will give me all the things that can be imported. So I'll click import. It'll say a design with this name has already been imported. I'm just going to skip all of those things. And when I go and look for it in my design center, my design pool, there it is, puzzle fill. And it'll be there the next time because I've saved it into this area. Right, I'm going to set some markers down for another one of my 12-inch blocks, which may be slightly wonky, we'll see. I'm going to mark the four corners using the sew head, and I'm going to connect them. You can probably already see that they're not exactly straight. Now, I happen to have a star drawn in here, so let's just see if we can get the star to work. So I shall put lots of little markers in. Okay, I have put markers around my little applique star. So I'm going to pull over this star block from here. There it is at the moment. I'm just going to roughly measure the star that I've got across the way and up and down. And then I'm going to try and get the star from the design pool to look rather good around my star. Okay, my star is approximately 4.5 inches across and 4.5 inches up and down the way. So let's just resize this one to approximately the same. So we will keep the maintain ratio on. We'll use the keypad. and I'll just drag it over. Then I'll need to go into full view to match it up. Okay, so I've got the new improved star on top of where my slightly wonky one is. I got rid of all my wonky little points, so this will be quite a nice one. Now I want to put the puzzle fill into here. I want to morph it right into the wonky square. So there it is. It's just floating about. So if I go into boundary, I can use my sew head or my screen to get this to fit into that odd shape. I'll use the sew head. Let's see if this works. We'll leave no margin. We want to morph to fit, and so it has. Now the next thing I need to do is to get the center of the star not to be stitched using the mask function. We're going to use the screen. For the selected design, we want to chop out the inside and we want to stitch the outside of the mask or the star. We will need to be an actual size view because I want to click the star. The star has now gone black, green check, and now it's been cut out. As you can see, there are going to be a lot of stops and starts, but we might as well see what it looks like, I suppose. To do that, we'll press play. It's obviously going to take Q-matic quite a while to stitch out this design, so I'm going to just end the video here, but put in a photo of the finished block at the end. What I did forget to do on this particular block was to remove the outer block stitch line, which I don't need, and I think it would have been better to have left a little margin. Apart from that, I think it's going to be very nice when it's finished. I hope you have found my explanations clear on how to use mask in Q-matic. Thanks for watching.